arrived at the scene. Police Scotland's Chief Constable has described the force as institutionally racist. Sir Ian Livingstone says people from different backgrounds are sometimes not receiving the service they should. He's been speaking at a meeting of the Scottish Police Authority. His comments come just days after the force announced plans to enlist thousands of officers to stamp out so-called canteen culture. Sir Ian is set to retire this summer after 6 years in the job. And tributes continue to pour in for one of rock and roll's most famous stars. Tina Turner has died at the age of 83.
You're simply the best. Better than all the rest.
In a career spanning over 60 years, the American singer sold more than 180 million albums and won 12 Grammys. Mick Jagger's called her inspiring, warm, funny and generous. Tom Jones describing her as one of a kind. The actress who plays Tina at the Tina Turner musical in London says the superstar would bring a huge party to heaven. No doubt the audience at the West End show has been reacting to the news.
Well, we were just overwhelmed. I think everybody was just so emotional. We didn't know how to react, really, did we?
What an amazing story of resilience, of female empowerment.
I brought probably the best bouquet of flowers you can buy because she simply was the best.
What's love got to do? It's got to do this. Who needs a heart when the heart can be broken?
And she will indeed be greatly missed. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Tom with GB News Live.
Well, it's a fast-paced news agenda today, and let's start with the biggest story of the day, which is, as expected, net migration has reached record levels. Figures released this morning revealed that 606,000 more people entered the UK than left, up to December 2022. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reacted to the news by saying that net migration was too high, but he denied that migration was out of control. The latest figures from the Home Office also show that half of all small boat arrivals in the year ending March 2023 were from two nationalities, Albanians and Afghans. Well, I'm joined now by Mark White in Dover, Darren McCaffrey in Westminster and Anna Riley in Hull. Mark, I'm going to start with you because these numbers we must make clear. The 606,000 isn't all about small boat arrivals. In fact, that's a relatively small portion of it. But for the first year, asylum seekers are being included in these figures.
Yes, absolutely. And certainly the small boat arrivals who then go on to claim asylum, they are the most visible manifestation of what the critics say is the government's inability to get proper control of our borders. But drilling into the figures, it's really quite interesting because although 606,000 net migration total is lower than what we were being told to expect, sounds like classic news management there. When you look at the Home Office figures as compared to the Office for National Statistics figures, they are quite revealing. So the ONS figures are for the calendar year of 2022, and they show that on work visas, 235,000 people arrived on work visas in that year. But if you look at the Home Office figures, they are for the year ending March this year. So March last year to March this year. And they show that 488,000 work visas and their dependents, they're including dependents there, arrived in that 12-month period. So a 76% rise on what the figure was the previous year. Also on student visas, the ONS figure showing 361,000 arrived in 2022. But when you look at the Home Office figures up until March of this year, 632,000 including, again, their dependents. But even if you take the ONS figures with their dependents, it only takes it up to about 460,000 who have arrived in that period. And yes, crucially on the those arriving across the channel on the small boats, some very interesting new information on the demographics of those arriving. Two nations, Afghanistan and Albania, were the two top nations in terms of those represented on the small boats coming across. But in the first 3 months of this year, the Home Office are revealing that India has now moved up into second position. So it's Afghanistan and India. 900 Afghans came in the first 3 months of the year, 700 Indians, and the Albanian number, well, it's just disappeared to actually only 28 in the first 3 months.
So
1% of the total coming across.
That is a very, very interesting development. It would suggest that the returns agreement this country has negotiated with Albania is actually working.
Yes, I think there is no doubt that the returns agreement, the very strident language, of course, that was coming out from the UK government, saying that those who had come across from Albania to the UK, even if they claimed asylum, even if they claimed to be victims of modern slavery, there would be very quick and decisive action to return those individuals to Albania, that it was felt there was absolutely no real legitimate reason for anyone from this peaceful nation on the fringes of the European Union to come to the UK and claim asylum. So that appears, at face value anyway, on the latest figures, to have some impact, reducing it right down to just 28 Albanians in the first 3 months of this year.
Absolutely fascinating. It suggests that quick processing and indeed quick returns can really have a significant impact here. Let's turn now to Darren McCaffrey in Westminster, because the wider political picture here is a battle between the Labour Party, that is saying the Tories have lost control of the system, and the Conservative Party, which I'm not quite sure what they're saying this morning. What are they saying, Darren?
Well, this is the weird thing, Tom. I actually think it's a battle within the Conservative Party about different competing interests in many regards. If you look at the kind of three broad areas of migrants who've arrived over the last year, you've got a large proportion of students. Now, clearly the Education Secretary, her department, and indeed the university sector as a whole are saying, look, this is good. We want foreign students in this country. Not only do they add to the academic capabilities potentially of our universities, they invest a lot of money, they pay higher tuition fees than domestic students, which helps subsidise those world-leading universities. And most of them do go home, but some of them stay, and the people who stay tend to be quite bright, and they really contribute to the overall economy. Then you've got the second kind of main tranche, which are people seeking asylum, mostly legally, whether they're from Ukraine and whether they're from places like Hong Kong. Again, the government have designed these schemes specifically. Now, this may be a one-off. Clearly, the number of refugees, for example, coming from Ukraine this year should be a lot lower than it was last year. And then you've got these work visas, where again, this is a government-designed scheme after Brexit to get people to come here to work in certain sectors, whether that be in the health sector with nurses and doctors, whether it be on lower paid jobs in hospitality or with fruit pickers and so on. In fact, the government is doing anything. They're extending that scheme to include fishermen, for example, which has been announced in recent days. So all in all, the government has designed essentially the main increase in these numbers. Now, do they think they are too high? They do. Have they been talking about it being too high for a long time? Yes, they have. Are we expecting them now to announce further measures to try and lower the numbers? Almost certainly. The Prime Minister on TV this morning talking about how they are decreasing the number of dependents, for example, of people who can travel when they come here for university education. That will have an effect on numbers because it's been one of the big growth areas over the last year. And then Robert Jenrick who was in the Commons, not Suella Braverman, you may notice the Home Secretary responding to Yvette Cooper today, said that they were sympathetic to Labour's calls about barring employers from recruiting farm workers below the industry's going rate. This is Labour's main policy. They say that actually the level at which people are allowed to enter this country on visas in terms to work here is too low, often undercutting domestic workers. Labour want to see that changed, and it seems the government today were hinting that they might somewhat agree with that position.
A really, really interesting debate there. Of course, there has been debate in previous years about whether or not students should be included in these figures at all. Many people up and down the country don't see students as in the same category as migrants. But let's turn to Anna Riley in Hull, because you've been looking into this issue of students and crucially, the dependence of students. What's been going on there?
That's it, Tom. Yes, it's the dependents that the government are looking into. We know that student visas make up the large majority of those migration figures, and we know from the Home Office statistics, the year ending to March 2023, that student visas, including for dependents, was at 632,000, and that was up 34% from the year before. So those numbers are rising, and in efforts to curb this migration, the government are clamping down on dependents. So they've said from January next year, unless international students are on a PhD course, they won't be able to bring dependents with them. They're also bringing in other measures as well. They're saying that they're going to see if international students with dependents do have the financial means to support the families that are with them. They also say that international students are going to have to complete their studies, complete their degree before they can apply for a work permit. And they've said that in their words, they're going to clamp down on unscrupulous student international agencies that may be getting international students in through illegal means. And as well as that, they do say that they are in support of the international education strategy. They understand the financial positives that we get from international students. Indeed, there's been a report recently from London Economics, and that shows that here in Yorkshire and the Humber, international students bring £2.9 billion to the economy. And for the UK as a whole, they bring £41.9 billion to the economy. I'm here at Hull University, it's just behind me. They welcome 4,000 international students a year from 70 different countries. So the universities certainly see the financial benefits that international students bring, and the government do as well, but they're wanting to bring down these figures by clamping down on the dependence that can be brought across with international students.
Anna, thank you for that. It's really, really interesting, this question of the international students. Let's just return to Mark White for a second, because there has been this debate time and time again in terms of why on earth we're including students in these figures. Why would we include students in these figures if they're here for 3 years and then leave again? They're not behaving like other sorts of migrants.
No, but they do have an impact, obviously, in the 3 years that they're here. I mean, they're not just here for a month or two, Tom. 3 years is an amount of time to clearly have to be housed in decent accommodation, to, of course, avail themselves, if they need to, of the likes of the health service and other public services that have to be paid for as well. So in that sense, they are a group of people migrating to the country for a period of time. And it's this big issue, really, about whether we as a nation actually can cope with what is the size of, you know, a not that small a city every year. If you're talking 600,000 people, potentially more next year, although hopefully the other factors like a reduction in those coming from Ukraine and maybe Hong Kong will ensure that next year perhaps isn't as large as this year. The government certainly says it's determined to help reduce it, and a primary concern of theirs is, of course, the impact on communities and those public services.
And just finally, Darren McCaffrey, this as a political question. There are some green shoots, perhaps, for the government. Across the year, these numbers are higher than last year. But in the last 3 months of this year, we've seen the numbers declining. Can we expect that next year the numbers are looking, save for any large global events that might change the course of things, but ceteris paribus, next year, we're expecting these numbers to be lower?
Well, that's what I find fascinating about this debate, is that the assumption seems to be, you know, from listening to the commentary just there and indeed elsewhere, that actually lower levels of migration are good for Britain. Now, there are clearly a section of the population, there are some within government, there are certainly some within business and the university section, who actually are pretty comfortable with these type of figures. They would argue that Britain can sustain levels of migration at this level. But clearly, politically, that is not where the government wants to be. And it's interesting with the public opinion on all of this. Actually, if anything has happened in the last 10 years, particularly since Brexit, the public seem to, at least at the moment, be a lot more relaxed about higher levels of legal migration than they have been in the past. Now, that might well change. If they look at these record-breaking numbers every year, they might feel a lot more uncomfortable about this. But in that, trying to answer your question, yes, I think the expectation from the government is twofold. Well, A, you know, a lot of what, not a lot, but a certain sizable chunk of what's happened this year has been driven by unique events in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, and to a degree Hong Kong, and that's not likely to be replicated every year, as you say, barring another major event. And second of all, that some of the measures the government will take will drive down these numbers. But also, let's be honest about this, and again, this is where the contradiction and all this comes from. You look at opinion polls, as I say, people generally feel a bit more relaxed about immigration overall. If you ask them about the impact on the local community, they feel a little bit more uncomfortable. But then also, if you say, do we need more doctors and nurses and people to come and pick fruit in this country because there's a shortage of workers, they say, yeah, I think we kind of do. While at the same time, we've got record numbers of people out of work, on benefits, particularly due to ill health. So none of this is easy, none of it's straightforward, but it is definitely a debate I think the country's going to have about whether this level of migration is sustainable, let alone desirable.
Well, Darren McCaffrey, thank you for that summary. And indeed, thank you to Mark White and Anna Riley as well for that broad overview of these complicated issues. But let's dive in to a more specific point here that Darren touched upon, and that is the impact on various sectors of our economy, particularly hospitality. Let's cross to Scotland, where our reporter Tony Maguire has been looking at the issue of hospitality. And Tony, what have you found?
Good afternoon. Yes, well, I'm in Glasgow by the riverside, and behind me you'll see part of that iconic Glasgow skyline. And not only is it iconic in the terms of being postcards, but you'll also find a real microcosm there of Scottish hospitality. We have, of course, the world-renowned Hydro Oval Stadium, where some of the best bands in the world will come and play, which you can enjoy with some of the most overpriced alcohol at lukewarm temperatures. But we've also got a number of hotels and restaurants, and right here you'll see this real kind of almost mini ecosystem where we can kind of observe, you know, the ins and outs and the impacts of this. Today's figures. Now, looking really across the country, as you might expect, SNP kind of treats the issue of migration quite differently. And certainly yesterday, when he was at the conveners meeting in front of committee, Humza Yousaf, he spoke about kind of the real disdain for the way that Westminster's going about it, as opposed to the kind of humane way that he thinks that the SNP do things differently. Now, whether or not that's the truth, SNP put out a statement today talking about the immigration figures, and they had come out to say that the Westminster obsession with immigration is vastly different, and it masks the fact that the UK government is failing. And of course, one might expect that it's essential, therefore, that Scotland goes for independence. But the reality is that immigration, however high, those immigrants who are coming to the UK, they're not necessarily going where they're needed. So here in Scotland, Scotland, there are about 10% of hospitality jobs are actually vacant. And, you know, and some of them actually might quite surprise you. So around 84% of hospitality businesses have front of house, so we're talking waiters, maitre d's, etc., staff shortages. And then if we go deeper, general managers, which you would expect at every establishment, you know, 1 in 8 hospitality businesses in Scotland is missing one of them and is unable to fill that role. These are roles that were traditionally held by migrants looking to come for a change of life here in the UK, and for whatever reason we're not seeing that just now. So certainly hospitality at the minute is one of the real sufferers of a lack of direction for immigrants coming to the country.
Really, really interesting, the difference there, particularly perhaps the smaller numbers of that net figure that make their way to Scotland. Certainly, Scotland accepting far fewer refugees than England is. Perhaps it's similar with regards to economic migrants as well, and that explains some of the disparity. Well, Tony, I look forward to speaking to you a bit more later in the programme, but for now, you're with GB News Live. Coming up, the Princess of Wales is carrying out engagements today to highlight the importance of nurturing relationships through early childhood. We'll be getting the very latest from our royal reporter.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Princess of Wales is carrying out engagements today to highlight the importance of nurturing relationships through early childhood and beyond. That's including those that are outside the normal traditional family settings. Oh, there she is. She's been visiting those who have experienced the care system and also with foster carers and adoptive parents to hear about their experience. That's a visit in central London that the Princess of Wales has been making. Well, our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, is joining us live from central London to tell us a little bit more about it. What's the Princess been up to? I think we need to just establish that audio connection. I believe we can come back to Cameron now. Cameron, what's been on the itinerary of the Princess today?
Yes, Tom, sorry, apologies for that. As I was saying, it's off the back of the first children's picnic at the Chelsea Flower Show on Monday that the Princess attended, and today was very much continuing that theme, her mission of supporting development of Britain's children. So she is in London today, a number of engagements she's carrying out, but it's all about today the importance of nurturing relationships, particularly with young children and children who have experienced trauma in their lives, adversity, as well as bereavement. So that's very much the theme of today. So the Foundling Museum is the building you are seeing behind me for those of you watching on television, which tells the story of the Foundling Hospital set up in the 1700s, Britain's first children's charity which supported children whose mothers could not care for them. And as part of that, the Princess was meeting young adults who had recently left the care system, as well as foster families and adoptive parents as well. And she was learning about the Foundling Museum, who supports young care leavers, their Tracing Our Tales programme. It's an award-winning programme set up in 2017, which gives young care leavers the training and the skills and confidence they need to have kind of lifelong fulfilling lives. So it supports them in return to education, if they so wish, or getting an apprenticeship, or indeed getting a job as well. And there's also a number of learning programmes on offer which the Princess observed and saw, including a creative writing workshop, and the Princess was actually joined in that by Professor Green, the English rapper. He himself was brought up by his grandmother rather than his parents. And Professor Green has a link to the Princess already, actually, as part of her Shaping Us campaign. It's the Centre for Early Childhood set up by the Princess's Royal Foundation. And it's this idea, she set this campaign up in January, and it's idea that the first 5 years of a child's life is crucially important to their development and future well-being. And what the Princess has found since starting her career, I suppose, as a member of the royal family back in 2011, is the people she was meeting who was experiencing mental health problems or addiction problems or homelessness, all the problems seem to stem, or perhaps have stemmed, from a poor start in life. So that's what this campaign is aiming for. It's shining a light on those issues, and the Princess is very much going to be continuing that in the years and months ahead.
Really, really important issues there, early years particularly. Cameron Walker, thank you so much for bringing us that very latest news live there from central London. Well, coming up, the energy regulator Ofgem has dropped its energy price cap by £450. But what does that actually mean for you, for consumers? We'll be breaking down these figures. But first, here are the news headlines with Rhiannon.
Tom, thank you. It's 12:31, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Downing Street has refused calls for Rishi Sunak to apologise, despite failing to reduce net migration, which has now risen to record levels. ONS data shows numbers rose to 606,000 last year, even after repeated government pledges to bring overall numbers down. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says the government is trying to tackle the issue.
Net migration is far too high. This is placing intolerable pressure on public services, on housing supply, and our ability to integrate people into our country. The Conservative Party has made a promise to reduce net migration, and we're absolutely determined to do that. Well, we've made a very significant intervention this week, which will make a tangible difference, reducing the number of student dependents that come to our universities, because universities should be in the education business, not the immigration business.
Rishi Sunak has welcomed the reduction in the energy price cap, saying it's a major milestone in his goal of halving inflation. Ofgem's announced the typical annual household energy bill will fall to £2,074 a year from July. That's a drop of £426. Currently, the government's price guarantee limits a typical bill to be around £2,500. Ofgem says the reduction reflects recent falls in wholesale energy prices. It's the first price drop in 18 months due to the global gas crisis.
Oh, for God's sake!
No! Stop it! 3 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at London's Chelsea Flower Show. The women climbed over a rope and threw orange paint over the RBC Bruin Dolphin Garden. One bystander turned a hose pipe on the protesters before Met police officers arrived at the scene. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. And we'll be back. Tom will be back with GB News Live in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2361 and €1.1528. The price of gold is £1,586.50 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,604 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back. You're with GB News Live. Now, the energy regulator Ofgem has announced it will lower its energy price cap from the current £3,280 per year to the very specific £2,074 a year. Now, that's for the average household in England, Wales and Scotland, and takes effect from July the 1st. Well, joining us now to say what this actually means is our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. Now, Liam, the price cap was at just over £3,000, but that's not what we were actually paying. What does this actually change?
All kinds of numbers flying around, Tom. Strap yourself in and I'll try to explain, because you've got the energy price cap, which Ofgem, the energy regulator, announces, and then you've got the energy price guarantee, which is what the government guarantees is the maximum that we pay. And that was a special measure, of course, in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine. Let's have a look at some of the numbers. So the cap is being cut from £3,280 per year to £2,074 per year from July. Now, this is the average unit price is put forward by Ofgem, and then that translates into an annual bill for an average household. So that doesn't mean that that's the maximum any, bigger household.
If you use more, you'll pay more. If you use less,
you'll pay less. If we just have that graphic back, because I haven't finished talking about it. Thank you. So the cap has come down from £3,280 to £2,074 from July. And that the average bill, though, is going down, not from £3,280, but from £2,050, because that was the energy price guarantee that the government was paying for the difference, to £2,074 from July. So that's a pretty big reduction. Having said that, if we can now have the next graphic, even though that is a reduction, if you do the maths, of on average £426 per year, a 17% drop, pretty nice. But at the same time, Tom, and this is the thing that no one's picking up on, in March, as the energy price cap is set to come down in July, in March, the government removed the subsidy it was giving every household in monthly instalments via their bills of £400. So the cap's coming down by about 400 quid, and yet the support that the government gives all households, that was an across-the-board thing, with additional support for particularly vulnerable households, that additional support will continue. But the across-the-board support, recognising the extra energy bills of the war in Ukraine, is disappearing just as the price cap is coming down. So that amounts to a 5 or 10% reduction this summer, rather than a big 17-20% reduction, which is what the headline writers are saying.
So crucially here, the most vulnerable households will still get that support. But what we're seeing, really the end of, the shift here, is for middle and better off earners. The government's subsidies are ending, but the market is sort of stepping in to replace the government's subsidy, and we're pretty much where we were before. But good news for the taxpayers.
Good news for taxpayers, because the government won't be spending that 400 quid across the board of 32 million households. That's real money. But that's because wholesale prices are coming down. And wholesale prices are coming down, Tom, because we had a relatively warm winter last year, and there's a lot of gas in storage, not much in this country, but across the European Union, where we sometimes import gas from, there's an awful lot of gas in storage. And also we're increasingly getting our gas from the United States in the form of liquefied natural gas, fracked gas, that they then put on ships in liquid form and bring over to the
The mad circus whereby the
carbon involved
the
in
Americans
that is
frack the gas. We use energy then to freeze that gas. We then ship it halfway around the world, unfreeze it, and then use it when we're sitting on a lot of gas in this country ourselves.
But we're not fracking, and our carbon footprint is completely insane, in my view. Sorry, it's just what the analysis shows. So look, the point I would make going forward, and economists are the dismal scientists. I don't wish to be, gloomy about this. But if there is a colder winter this November to February, March, then gas prices will go up again. And the question is whether or not the government will be able to pony up money with our massive debts, huge interest payments on government debt, £10 billion a year in April. We won't pay it all in one month, but massive increases in debt interest. Will the government be able to provide that energy support, not just for households, but also for firms? So even though inflation is coming down, we saw yesterday the headline rate, there is this Achilles heel here, which is energy costs. And I would say, with our lack of gas storage, Tom, the UK is particularly vulnerable to those higher energy costs, even though we import an awful lot of gas because we have the LNG terminals, which continental Europe doesn't have. We import an awful lot of gas from the US.
It's interesting. A lot of people have been saying in the last year or so the United Kingdom inflation situation is so much more influenced by energy than other countries, not just because we import so much energy, but also we've got very leaky homes. We've got Victorian infrastructure, countries that developed later, that got on that industrial revolution bandwagon later, perhaps better off when it comes to this stuff now because they've got tighter infrastructure.
There is some truth in that. You know, I live in a 500-year-old home, which isn't unusual in the town where I live because it's full of, you know, chocolate box houses that were built in Tudor times. And these aren't exceptional in the UK. We have lots of very old homes. We don't absolutely compel home builders, developers to insulate homes as they build them, as they do in other countries. And so we are vulnerable in that sense. I tell you another country that's vulnerable, and it's very interesting today, Tom. I haven't seen many broadcasters mention this, but just as the UK has avoided recession, Germany has gone into recession.
Yes.
Europe's biggest economy. Why has Germany gone into recession, Tom? Specifically because its manufacturing sector is much bigger than ours and it's very energy dependent. And the kind of German economic miracle of the last 20 or 30 years has, I'm afraid, been built on cheap Russian gas. Well, everything from manufacturing to pharmaceuticals. These companies are now suffering because gas prices in Germany are high, not least because they were so dependent on Russian gas. And that's the main reason Germany is, in some senses, even more energy vulnerable than we are here in the UK.
Fascinating story in Germany. Higher food price inflation than the UK.
And going into the European Union last time I checked.
Liam, I hope to talk to you more about Germany later in the programme, and particularly in the uprating of the United Kingdom's growth forecasts. But we need to move on now because today is the funeral of one of the last so-called pilots of the Caribbean. Flight Sergeant Peter Brown was born in Jamaica and joined the RAF in 1943. The veteran's funeral was due to take place in March, but after huge public interest in the story, his story, a bigger venue, had been arranged. Well, our Lisa Hartle has this story.
Flight Sergeant Peter Brown died alone, aged 96, in West London in December. Initially, his funeral was set to take place in a smaller venue in March, but after a campaign was launched to find surviving members of his family, a bigger venue had to be found after huge public interest in Peter's life story.
Those are the wings that will spread over Europe like...
Peter was one of, if not the last of the so-called pilots of the Caribbean. Born in Jamaica in 1926, Mr. Brown joined the RAF in September 1943. He trained as a wireless operator and gunner on Lancaster bombers before being posted to RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire. When the war ended, he re-enlisted as a signaller in the RAF. After Peter's death, an appeal was launched to find members of his family. Rosemary, who believes she is his second cousin, came forward after reading the story online.
I click on this thing and up comes this article about this gentleman, and I start reading and I'm thinking, oh dear God, this is my Peter Brown. Not only that, he looks Caymanian. That must be my Peter Brown. He left Jamaica, he left his mother. His dad had passed away, but he left familiarity and life in Jamaica, which at that time, that's a big deal. You know, when you go from Cheshire or Southampton to go and fight across the channel, that's far enough. But when you go all the way from Jamaica to a new life and a new way of being, it's a big service.
Kim Ashola was a neighbour of Peter Brown for many years.
In life, you meet very few bright spots in life. Somebody that you would think, wow, I am so pleased that I knew him, that I met him. And Peter Brown is one of those people. He was stylish, always carried himself well, with dignity, smartly dressed, always smiling. Every conversation I had with Peter ended with laughter, or me walking away smiling.
Peter was one of an estimated 10,000 people who came from the Caribbean to join the British Armed Forces during World War II.
He made a huge contribution. He, along with thousands of other persons from the UK worldwide, but of particular interest to us, obviously, is that he was one of the thousands from the Caribbean, and Jamaica actually had the largest contingents in World War II. Everybody, what is significant is everybody was a volunteer. They were not conscripted, they volunteered. Some of them paid their own way across the Atlantic.
I asked him what she thinks Peter would have thought of all the attention now surrounding him.
I think he would say, as he used to say when he thought something was funny, and he would say, ooh, something, ooh, can you believe it? You know, like an old Jamaican guy. Ooh, can you believe it? I think he actually would be so pleased that people cared about him.
Lisa Hartle, GB News, London.
Well, thank you to Lisa for bringing us that. And I think we all do care about that last generation of true World War II heroes, the best of the best, those few to which so much was owed by so many, in the words of Winston Churchill. Well, to move on from one legend to another, the legendary rock and roll icon Tina Turner has died peacefully at the age of 83. That's following a long illness. Touching tributes have been pouring in from the likes of Mick Jagger and Mariah Carey, with Elton John describing her as untouchable and a total legend on record and on stage. In a career spanning over 60 years, the American singer sold more than 180 million albums and won 12 Grammys for hits such as The Best, Proud Mary, and What's Love Got to Do with It?
What's love got to do? It's got to do with it. What's love but a second-hand emotion? What's love got to do? It's got to do with it. Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken?
Well, joining me now is singer-songwriter Janice Robinson, who toured with Tina back in the year 2000. And Janice, thank you so much for making the time for us this afternoon. It's a pleasure to have you. I believe we can establish connection. There you are. And I'm so fascinated by the story of Tina Turner, because it's not just the story of a world-class musician, of someone who's become the soundtrack to all of our lives, really, but also someone who struggled through such adversity to reach such heights.
I mean, Tina was the blueprint. She was the compass for my own journey, and she opened a door for me, graciously giving me an opportunity to be her opening act on her farewell tour. I mean, she was one of a kind, and she was fire, you know? It's been very emotional for me, because last time I was talking about her was 23 years ago, as I went to every news outlet, and they always would ask me, what is it like opening for Tina Turner? What is it like opening for Tina Turner? And I would say it's a dream come true. I mean, she was my idol from the time I started singing, you know, and for her to choose me, for her to get her validation, it meant everything. I don't need anything else from the music industry, because the woman that I admired the most, she saw me, you know, and I'm gonna really miss her. I'm gonna miss everything, but her legacy and her music that she left us should be carried on for generations to come. Her story will continue to resonate and inspire many generations to come.
What was it about Tina Turner that made her so iconic, that made her such a global icon? I believe we're having a little bit of an issue with the sound there. I think we might have re-established it. We were just speaking about what made Tina Turner such a global icon.
She was an undeniable force of nature. I mean, when you were in her presence, you felt this energy. Like, I just remember standing there next to her, and we were both wearing black men's shirts. And I said, oh my God, we're even wearing the same shirt. I mean, I turned into a 5-year-old little girl in her presence. Every day, every time we had a show, I would do my opening number, you know, I would do my performance, and then I would go out and watch her like a student. And I would be in the front row because, you know, I would be down in the front, and I studied her, everything about her. It was just like getting a PhD in performing, you know, up close and personal. It was just surreal. And I toured with her at a time there was no social media. So I lived it. So I just lived it. I lived something very beautiful.
Now,
out of all the singers she could have chose, she chose little old me.
Such a special moment. But of course, Tina Turner wasn't always this global superstar. She struggled through such adversity in her life, and to some extent has helped many others, particularly when it comes to the terrible scourge of domestic abuse. Did she ever speak with you about that?
No, you know, the thing about Tina, she was very private. She put everything in her book. She left everything on the stage. So when it comes to the personal journey of the obstacles she faced, she was more focused on being a light and lighting up a room and making everyone feel comfortable around her. We all know the adversity. We all saw the movie. I mean, when she got with you personally, she wasn't one to bring up the dark days, but she was triumphant. She was triumphant. She was the epitome of triumphant.
And just finally, Janice Robinson, how has Tina Turner changed the music industry? How is the world different now because of her career and her life?
The world is different now because we have witnessed a woman overcoming a mountain of adversity, a mountain of pain, a mountain of struggle. She came up in a time where there was Jim Crow laws and all kinds of diversity. For her to excel and then make a comeback, like she said, I just want my name, to make a comeback at 44. She changed the world, and especially for women. She made aging such a fascinating journey. She made aging and doing what you love so attainable. And I'm still standing because of her, because she laid out a blueprint for life and for career that you can never give up, and you must always keep going, especially when you believe in something so powerful, believing in yourself. And I'm forever grateful. Like I said, I'm still standing because of her. And to talk about her 23 years later, you know, it's very emotional. The world is different because Tina Turner was light, and she was fire, and she was energy, and she was everything beautiful that we all can strive to be.
Well, Janice Robinson, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for making the time for us here on GB News this afternoon. I appreciate it. Janice Robinson, of course, opened for Tina Turner on her farewell tour. Well, I'm Tom Harwood here on GB News Live, and there is lots more to come in the next hour of this show, so don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon. We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, you're with GB News Live. I'm Tom Harwood, and here's what's coming up. A new record that puts the government under pressure. UK net migration reached 606,000 last year. Less than expected, but more than they were saying. We'll be getting all of the reaction live from across the country. And in terms of illegal migration, the second highest nationality coming in via the channel is Indian. The numbers of Albanians on small boats has all but disappeared. And thank you, Musk. Oh, sorry, and you must be joking. Presidential hopeful Ron DeSantis announced his White House bid in what's been described as a disastrous Twitter event live yesterday, after the social media site was overwhelmed by the number of viewers tuning in. What could this mean for his presidential hopes? And we'll continue to pay tribute to the Queen of Rock and Roll, Tina Turner, who passed away yesterday at the age of 83. She simply was the best. But before all of that, here are your headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Good afternoon, it's 1:01, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Downing Street has refused calls for Rishi Sunak to apologise despite failing to reduce net migration, which has now risen to record levels. ONS data shows numbers rose to 606,000 last year, even after repeated government pledges to bring overall numbers down. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says the government is trying to tackle the issue.
Well, net migration is far too high. This is placing intolerable pressure on public services, on housing supply, and our ability to integrate people into our country. The Conservative Party has made a promise to reduce net migration, and we're absolutely determined to do that. Well, we've made a very significant intervention this week, which will make a tangible difference, reducing the number of student dependents that come to our universities, because universities should be in the education business, not the immigration business.
But Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock says government policy is to blame for the rise in numbers.
Numbers are too high. They need to come down. The reason they've lost control is because they failed to do enough to invest in skills and talent and career development here in the UK. So employers are being forced to reach for overseas migrant labour because they don't have the pipeline of people that are ready to come and work and attracted as well to the opportunities that are here in the UK.
Rishi Sunak has welcomed the reduction in the energy price cap, describing it as a major milestone in his goal of halving inflation. Ofgem has announced the typical annual household energy bill will fall to a maximum of £2,074 a year from July. That's a drop of £426. Ofgem says the first price drop in 18 months reflects recent falls in wholesale energy prices. Police Scotland's Chief Constable has described the force as institutionally racist. Sir Ian Livingston says people from different backgrounds are sometimes not receiving the service they should. He's been speaking at a meeting of the Scottish Police Authority. His comments come just days after the force announced plans to enlist thousands of officers to stamp out so-called canteen culture. Sir Ian's set to retire this summer after 6 years in the job. 3 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at London's Chelsea Flower Show.
Oh, for God's sake!
No! Stop it! Members of the public expressed dismay as the woman climbed over a rope and threw orange paint over the RBC Bruin Dolphin Garden. One bystander turned a hosepipe on the protesters before Met Police officers arrived on the scene. Security guards at Heathrow Airport are beginning a 3-day strike over pay on what's expected to be one of the busiest days of the year for air travel. Heathrow says it may take longer than usual to get through security, but claims it has contingency plans in place to minimise disruption. Members of the Unite Union have already held 15 days of industrial action, including over the Easter holidays. Elsewhere, the head of Wagner has announced forces from Russia's mercenary group have started withdrawing from the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. Yevgeny Prigozhin claims he's transferring its positions there to regular Russian troops instead. He announced the capture of the city on May the 20th after the longest and bloodiest battle of the war so far. Prigozhin says his forces will be ready to return to Bakhmut if the regular army is unable to manage the situation.
We are pulling units out of Bakhmut. It's 5 a.m. on May 25th. Before June 1st, most units will be relocated to the rear camps. We're transferring positions and ammunition to the military, everything, including military rations. But if the military is in a tough situation, of course, we are leaving those who played a crucial part in capturing Bakhmut. The moment when the military are in a tough situation, they will stand up and block the way for the Ukrainian army.
And the Princess of Wales is visiting the Foundling Museum in London to meet foster parents and learn about the care system. Kate is a patron of the museum, which tells the history of the Foundling Hospital, which in the mid-18th century began caring for children abandoned by their parents. The Princess is meeting young people who've been in care, as well as caretakers, to discuss the lifelong impact positive, supportive relationships can have on children and young people. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Tom.
You're watching GB News Live, and let's start this hour with the big story of the day, which is, as expected, net migration has reached record levels. Figures released this morning revealed that 606,000 more people entered the UK than left up to December 2022. This was 164,000 more people than 2021's net migration rise. The Office of National Statistics said that despite the rise, it estimates for long-term migration a slowing in growth over the more recent quarters. Now, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, reacted, saying that this migration in the UK is still too high, whilst the Labour Party says that the government has no plan and no grip. Well, let's speak now to someone who perhaps disagrees with that assessment, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Boston and Skegness, Matt Warman. And Matt, first of all, the Conservative Party has delivered a points-based system. You can no longer blame freedom of movement. You can no longer blame the European Union. The government is in control, and it's promised to get numbers down, and yet they've risen. Why is that?
Well, I think one of the things that the points-based system does is actually reward people who want to come here and meet the criteria. It is in the government's hands, as you say, to change what those criteria are. And I think that's one of the things that we need to look at urgently. But I do think it's also important to say that when it comes to what are people in the constituency of Boston and Skegness getting in touch with me on migration about most, it is illegal migration that bothers them more even than legal migration.
And certainly we've been looking at some of the elements of illegal migration and indeed of asylum seeking, which for the first time is being included in these figures this year. Do you think that that has a significant impact compared to previous years when these sort of migrants were simply not included in these figures?
Well, I think it's right to include all kinds or more kinds of migration than we have previously in migration figures. It gives an honest picture. And what that reveals, of course, is that there is a huge need within the UK economy for some forms of migration, whether it's in the NHS, whether it's in agriculture, in a constituency like mine. And what we've got to do is, I think, try and move towards a system where you've got higher skilled jobs and you're trying to eliminate some of those lower skilled jobs from the UK economy, whether that's through mechanisation, whether it's through changing how things are done. We've got to look at ways that make us less reliant on migration, because it puts such a pressure on public services and it puts such pressure on community cohesion as well.
Now, the number of people coming from the European Union on a net figure has gone negative. More European Union citizens are now leaving the United Kingdom than coming in on these figures. The massive growth has been in non-EU migration. Is that a policy success?
Well, I think what it does show is that people from around the world, whether they be the EU or wherever, continue to want to come to the UK. On one level, that is an economic success story. But what I think we have to do is make sure that the criteria to allow you to come, now that they are in our hands, are tightened up. There is a possible version of this, which is very much a success story, which builds on the UK's reputation as somewhere that so many people want to come. But it can't be giving the impression that it is in any way an open door policy, especially now that we've left the European Union.
And the question of international students is an interesting one. There has been a debate for a long time now as to whether students should be included in these figures. Are international students really in the same category as normal migrants? Should they be included in these figures?
Well, I don't think they should, and I think the practical reason is very obvious. They are people who are here for a set period of time. They are very likely to go back to their original countries. That's different from people who come to work as adults, very often extend that period, end up staying for a whole host of reasons. I think in practice what we should be focusing on is the fact that there is a figure with its students included and one without, and I think we should be more focused on the one without, but obviously they are in a different category fundamentally.
And just finally, we still do have labour shortages in this country. The number of work visas in this total number that we've got from the ONS this morning is only around 200,000. That's 1/3 of the total number of those coming in net for migration. And yet we know that more than 500,000 people have left the workforce following COVID for whatever reason. This migration simply isn't plugging the gaps, is it?
No, and that's the problem with the system that people, I think, were promised pre-Brexit and what we currently are delivering. That is something that you're seeing a real focus from the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary on fixing, so that migration is there to plug gaps. It's not there to allow people to bring in dependents who perhaps shouldn't be able to come to this country. So I think the direction of travel is the right one, but migration has to be, to use that take back control slogan, something that is within our own gift to use it to our best economic advantage, while also preserving some capacity, of course, for people from Ukraine, for people from Afghanistan, for people from Hong Kong and similar situations that might arise in the future. It has to be about a balance of economics for some people and, of course, preserving, as I say, that capacity for the compassionate response that we've seen across the UK in situations such as Ukraine.
And very finally, will you be taking that call to remove students from these figures to the Home Secretary?
Well, I think, as I say, the important thing is to make sure that we're honest about the numbers. That means knowing what the numbers are without students included and focusing on that. I think it's important that we have access to both kinds of information, of course, but I do think, as I say, my view and the view that I'll happily communicate to the Home Secretary and the Immigration Minister is that the figure we should be focusing on is the one without students.
Well, Matt Warman, thank you very much for joining us here on GB News Live. Appreciate your time this afternoon. And now let's turn to our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who's been taking a look back at the history of these rising numbers within migration and indeed what could be described as broken promises.
Net migration needs to come down radically from hundreds of thousands a year to just tens of thousands.
We do want to bring net migration down to sustainable levels. We believe that is the tens of thousands.
The answer is to control immigration.
I think the numbers are too high, and I'm committed to bringing them down.
We've had 13 years of Conservative Prime Ministers pledging to cut net migration. Yet the numbers have gone up and up, now reaching a new record high. How did we get here?
Until the early 80s, Britain was a net exporter of people. But under New Labour, net migration increased fivefold, driven by free movement within the European Union, which expanded eastwards in 2004. Brexit was won on a promise to take back control, including of our borders. Britain would decide who came, and numbers would fall.
Now the government does have control, and an Australian points system, but the numbers have surged.
We've offered sanctuary to refugees from Ukraine, Afghanistan and to Hong Kongers. Then the students and the dependents they bring. Dependent numbers are up eightfold since 2019. And this week, the government announced a crackdown. And Conservative Party Deputy Chairman Matt Vickers highlights changes in the way net migration is recorded.
Huge numbers were being missed in the past, and actually if you speak to the people responsible for recording, they'll tell you that there is a huge difference in the way that we're recording, and the impact is that those numbers are not being inflated, they're actually just being made accurate, where previously they were in no way accurate.
There's also a battle raging at the top of government. The Home Office wants to get numbers down. Here's the beleaguered Home Secretary just last week.
There is no good reason why we can't train up enough truck drivers, butchers, fruit pickers, builders or welders. Brexit enables us to build a high-skilled, high-wage economy that is less dependent on low-skilled foreign labour.
Meanwhile, the Treasury and departments such as Education and Health want immigrants to plug gaps and to grow our sluggish economy. Yet we've a record 5.3 million adults on out-of-work benefits.
Looking at the welfare system and ensuring that the incentives are there for some of our own people to take on some of the jobs that we're currently relying on cheap foreign labour to do.
The government makes a lot of noise about illegal migration and stopping the boats, but with a housing crisis and public services under strain, pollster James Johnson says they need to get legal migration down.
In a recent poll for the think tank Centre for Policy Studies, 59% said that immigration in this country is too high. When you go anywhere in the country and do focus groups, whether it's in those safer Conservative seats in the south or whether it's in those seats in the red wall, immigration is always on top of mind.
But for the Conservatives, with the general election looming next year, getting net migration down will need to be a key focus.
Catherine Forster, GB News.
Well, let's dig into this further. I'm joined now by Darren McCaffrey in Westminster, Jack Carson in Solihull and Will Hollis in Boston. And Darren, let's start with you, because it is the case that Conservative governments have promised to get migration down, although in the 2019 manifesto, that famous and fabled pledge to get it down to the tens of thousands was quietly dropped. This creates a bit of a political problem for the Prime Minister.
It does indeed, because the Prime Minister has repeatedly said, as have his predecessors, that they want to see net migration fall. And yet, if you look at the graphs, it's frankly heading in the other direction, to the point where today we have got record numbers. And let's be frank about this, who is responsible for that? Well, it is none other than the government. It is the government that has decided to adopt this kind of worker visa system that has led to, frankly, a lot of nurses, doctors, fruit pickers, agriculture workers coming in to Britain. It has set the level, the threshold, some would say, including the opposition, too low, which means we've seen lots of those, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, frankly, come. You look at also the education sector, where again the government have encouraged students to move over here. They've also allowed dependents to do so, though they're now clamping down on that. And it is also the government that has allowed these legal routes for refugees to come to the UK too, whether they be Ukrainians, Hong Kongers, or people from Afghanistan. So all in all, the government may well talk about wanting to reduce migration, but we've ended up today in the situation where they have created a record number of people coming here. Now, there are conflicts within government. There are some within the Treasury, within the Department of Education, who seem reasonably comfortable with these numbers. They would talk about the benefits that migration bring to particular business sectors, more particularly also to the education and the university sector in the UK. There are others who clearly feel very, very uncomfortable with it. So Ella Braverman, the Home Secretary, who, by the way, we have not seen today, has made quite a few speeches recently where she's made it clear that she wants to see those numbers drop quite dramatically. The Prime Minister today suggested they are going to take further measures on top of clamping down on the number of dependents who can come here with students. I think that might be actually adopting what Labour want to see, and that's increasing the income threshold for workers' visas. But is this a problem for the Conservative Party? Yes, frankly, it is. More people now trust Labour on immigration than they do the Conservatives, Tom. And going to an election where this could well be an issue, particularly if we see continuation of those record numbers, I think the Prime Minister will be concerned that Labour are now using this of all issues, immigration, to batter the government with.
And yet, Darren, could this not be described as precisely what the Vote Leave Brexit campaign wanted to see happen? They campaigned for control over migration and potentially even higher migration from outside the EU. Here's a leaflet that they put out during the campaign. It said, if we vote Leave, we'll have a fairer immigration system based on skills, controlling numbers without having to turn away talented people from outside the EU. And what's happened, what we can see in these numbers, is EU numbers have fallen and non-EU numbers have risen. To some extent, that's exactly what this leaflet was saying.
Yeah, and that's where none of this is straightforward. And the government is full of contradictions. Voters, let's be honest with this, are also full of contradictions. If you look at opinion polls, people have suggested that they're now a much more liberal approach to immigration. They're much more relaxed about migrants coming in to the country after Brexit, even though the numbers are higher. Now, is that because people wanted to see controlled migration? That may well, and it was an argument, you're right, made by some within the Vote Leave campaign. Though some would say that actually this idea that they're all skilled workers, given the income threshold level for certain sectors, is not necessarily true. And let's be honest about this, we are still recruiting people to come here and pick fruit, though they tend to be seasonal workers, but also the government's expanding the scheme to fishermen today. I mean, what happened about protecting our fishing industries? We're now having to recruit fisher people from elsewhere. And in addition to that, Tom, I think it's a little bit, I would say, kind of rewriting history by someone who would like to see this was all about simply control rather than numbers. I mean, we remember that actually a month before that referendum in 2016, we reached what was then a very, very high number, almost, I think, a record high of 330,000 net migration figure, dwarfed by today's figures. Did that bleed into the campaign? Did, frankly, a lot of people who voted for Brexit want to see fewer people? They wanted to see that number reduced quite substantially. They did. They hoped Brexit would achieve that. And in the end, what we've ended up with, as we've seen today, is actually the graph going in the opposite direction. Fascinating. And I'd say that this is at a time, though, when people, this may well change, but people on the whole are saying they're more relaxed about it now than they were 10 years ago.
And indeed, entirely due to domestic policy choices of this government over the last 3 years. Let's turn to Jack Carson now in Solihull, who's been looking at how the refugee situation feeds in to this whole picture. Because, Jack, for the first time, asylum seekers are being included in these figures.
Yeah, exactly, that's right. And of course, I'm stood in front of, behind me is one of the hotels here in the West Midlands, here in Solihull, where these asylum seekers are being, of course, temporarily housed, of course, until the government comes up with a more kind of permanent solution, if they can't, of course, process them as quickly as they would like to be. We've heard lots of different solutions, lots of different bases, whether it's disused ferries, but I've also been taking a look at this poll that we've had today as well, looking how the Labour Party are apparently more trusted on immigration than the Conservatives. This Ipsos poll saying that they trusted the Labour Party more, and they said they had the right policies on immigration. But I have been speaking to the people here in Solihull to see if that really is the case.
No, I totally disagree with that. I find that quite incredible. I think they're too supportive of opening the borders, and I think Braverman is absolutely correct in what she's doing, and she should stick by it. Richie Sunak should have supported her harder, sooner, and I hope she's successful.
I think it all depends on who's going to make the next mistake. It will change anyway, because obviously in X month's time when we have an election, that's when people will make their mind up. I think it's too early to start saying so-and-so is X points ahead, because you know fine well that when it comes to crunch, loyalties will probably take over anyway, as opposed to, you know, what they think about certain parties.
I don't think either of the political parties have got a great deal of trust at the moment. And I think both of them need to really reconsider what they're saying to the public, because I think public trust is at an all-time low.
Yeah, well, you've heard there, certainly here in Solihull, Conservative area, a feeling in the air of disenfranchisement.
Well, Jack, thank you for that, and apologies for the slight interruption on the signal there. Perhaps the government needs to think about full fibre coming all the way through Solihull. But let's turn to Will Hollis in Boston, who's been looking at the healthcare situation, because I suppose that's the other side of this. There are some occupations in Britain where we have shortages.
Yes, and one of those areas is, of course, the care sector. The government added care and social care onto the list of occupations that we have shortages of, so that more people come from outside of the UK and work here in those sectors. In fact, the Department for Health and Social Care is making £15 million available just to help the process, so that the people in the care homes and home care companies that want those people to come from places like Nigeria, the Philippines, as well as India, so that they can make that process a little bit easier, so that they can make the administration process a little bit more copable for people. So I've been speaking to the people that are involved in those sorts of process. One of those people is Melanie Weatherly, who's part of the Care Association Alliance, which is a national group of associations that manage different types of care. And she's the chair. She's been telling me a little bit about how the industry is hiring people from outside of the UK to come and work in the care sector here.
If the worker is selected properly, then we've not found it to be a problem. We were all a little bit apprehensive when we started, but the difference is here, when you're choosing a care worker, you're probably only looking at a couple of people who are right for the job. When you're recruiting from overseas, it's such an attractive role that you can pick the best. And we have a young gentleman in his late 80s who has learnt to say hello and goodbye in 3 Indian dialects, because he wanted to show the girls who come to support him how pleased he was that they're here. I think international recruitment at a small scale is probably here to stay as we live in a multicultural society, but it would be fantastic to have enough UK-based workers who really want to do this job and to be able to pay them a decent pay to enable them to stay in the sector. Lots of people would love to do the job but can't afford to.
So just to give you an idea of how many vacancies right now there are in health and social care, and that's anything from the top managers right down to the people who do the more intimate jobs of feeding and making sure that people can get up and out of bed. There are 165,000 vacancies at any time here in the UK. That's according to data from Skills for Care that collates data from across the sector. But since we've started particularly to look outside of UK's borders, in terms of the number of people that are coming here, 10% of all new starters in the care sector have arrived in the UK just in the last year. So that just gives you an idea of how many people are coming here to work in the care sector when the government is asking them to and seeking for them to do so.
Well, Will Hollis, thank you so much for bringing us all of that. It's fascinating to see such skills gaps remaining with such high migration. Thank you to all three of you for bringing us all of those different contexts to this story. My name's Tom Harwood, and we're on GB News Live. Coming up, Simply the Best. We're live at the London Theatre, playing host to Tina Turner, the musical, the day after the music legend died, aged 83.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 1:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Downing Street has refused calls for Rishi Sunak to apologise, despite failing to reduce net migration, which has now risen to record levels. ONS data shows numbers rose to 606,000 last year, even after repeated government pledges to bring overall numbers down. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says the government is trying to tackle the issue.
Well, net migration is far too high. This is placing intolerable pressure on public services, on housing supply, and our ability to integrate people into our country. The Conservative Party has made a promise to reduce net migration, and we're absolutely determined to do that. Well, we've made a very significant intervention this week, which will make a tangible difference, reducing the number of student dependents that come to our universities, because universities should be in the education business, not the immigration business.
Rishi Sunak welcomes the reduction in the energy price cap, saying it is a major milestone in his goal of halving inflation. Ofgem's announced the typical annual household energy bill will fall to £2,074 a year from July. That's a drop of £426. Ofgem says the reduction reflects recent falls in wholesale energy prices.
Oh, for God's sake!
No! Stop it! 3 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at London's Chelsea Flower Show. The women climbed over a rope and threw orange paint over the RBC brew in Dolphin Garden. One bystander turned a hose pipe on the protesters before Met Police officers arrived on the scene. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2374 and €1.1524. The price of gold is £1,585.93 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,606 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Well, thanks, Rhiannon. Moving on to the big stories of the day, and indeed the big cultural story of the day. The legendary rock and roll icon Tina Turner has died peacefully at the age of 83 following a long illness. Touching tributes have been pouring in from the likes of Mick Jagger and Mariah Carey, with Elton John describing her as untouchable and a total legend on record and on stage. In a career spanning over 60 years, the American singer sold more than 180 million albums and won 12 Grammys for hits such as The Best, Proud Mary, and What's Love Got to Do With It?
What's love got to do? It's got to do with it. What's love but a second-hand emotion? What's love got to do? It's got to do with it. Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken?
Well, let's join GB News London reporter Lisa Hartle now, who's outside the Aldwych Theatre in London, where the Tina Turner musical is being performed. And Lisa, I suppose it's now going to be booked out for the next for quite a few months to come.
Yeah, exactly. So last night when the performance was taking place, it was during the interval when everyone learnt, the cast came on stage and told everyone of the sad news that Tina Turner had passed away. And then they just said, let's, the second half, let's just celebrate her life. She was a producer on this show, and it's the show of her life. Joining me is Daryl, someone who's going to watch the show today, but has also seen Tina Turner perform in 1981. Is that correct?
Roughly 81, I believe, back in Michigan, outside of Detroit, Motown area.
And what made Tina Turner so special?
Well, just her music was electric. You know, great songs, great dance, great choreography with her and those legs that, you know, went up to here. Can't miss those.
And how do you feel today watching the performance?
Oh, it's a sad day in the music industry, that's for sure. You know, she's an icon, and still will be. You know, people pass and their music lives on, so it's wonderful.
And obviously, when you booked these tickets, you had no idea that Tina Turner would be passing away only yesterday.
Booked them yesterday.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
You did? So what made you decide that you wanted to come today?
Well, friends had already seen the show, and they said, go see it, go see it. So we'd already seen The Temptations last night, so booked tickets for Tina.
And being here today, like behind you, there's people leaving tributes, flowers.
Oh, yeah.
There's lots of members of the media trying to speak to people coming in to see the show. What do you think? Her career spanned over 60 years. What do you think the draw was with Tina Turner?
The music hit home for people. She was larger than life. The voice, just she could belt it out. That's what really is a great thing about her performing.
And tell me what it was like, because lots of people I've spoken to have said, I really wish I'd got to see her live, and you're one of the people that did get to see her live. What was she like?
It was a very, very small venue. It was, I think it was around 700, and you're really close to the stage, and she's up there and doing her dance moves. Just amazing. Just amazing to see.
And she was incredible, wasn't she? Because she kind of had two parts to her career. The first one with her, what would later be her ex-husband, right. And then after that, in her 40s, when she really kind of became this global superstar.
Right. I would have seen her before she was the huge star that she became to be. But she had plenty of hits 40 years ago.
And how do you think you're going to feel today when you're watching her life story that she helped to produce?
Yeah, because it's a tribute to her life instead of celebrating with her. It's going to be a little tearjerker inside, I'm sure, for a lot of folks.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us today, and I hope you enjoy the performance.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Bye now.
So this show's been here since 2018, but like I said before, Tina Turner was one of the producers of the show that tells her life story, and it's now going to serve as a celebration of her life for people for many years going forward.
Well, Lisa Hartle, thank you so much for bringing us that outside the Aldwych Theatre, which has become somewhat of a shrine to Tina Turner. Well, coming up, the energy regulator Ofgem has dropped its energy price cap by £450. So how much will we be saving? Well, we'll be breaking down the surprising figures next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop
failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And by the end of the debate, you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
You're watching GB News Live. Now, Ofgem's boss, Jonathan Brearley, has said that he expects energy prices to, quote, stay stable in the future, but warns any projections are unreliable. Now, after slashing the energy price cap this morning, that is, the energy regulator announced it will be lowering its energy price cap from the current £3,280 a year to £2,074, an incredibly specific number for the average UK household from July the 1st. But does that mean we'll really see our bills go down by £1,000? Perhaps not. Let's speak with Liam Halligan with On the Money. So, Liam, how much are we actually saving?
Lots of numbers flying around, Tom. I wish it was simple, but it isn't, because there's this thing called the energy price cap, and then there's the energy price guarantee, then there's the bill that your energy provider actually sends you, and then the numbers we're talking about for the average household anyway. So it depends on how much energy that you use. I've got some graphics here to try and make it a bit easier, and GB News radio listeners can hopefully keep up with me. So Ofgem has announced today that the energy price cap has been cut, as you say, from £3,280 to £2,074 from July the 1st. That's for the average household. They give a stipulated unit price for gas and electricity, and then if you use the average amount of an average of our 32 million households, these are the numbers that you'll pay. But of course, if you're a bigger household or a smaller household, you'll pay more or less. The average bills, though, isn't coming down from 3,280. It's coming down from 2,050, because that's the energy price guarantee that the government has stipulated is the maximum we pay, because the government has been paying the difference up until quite recently. And that is online to go from £2,500 to £2,074. Now, that's a pretty big amount of money over a year. That amounts to a reduction in the next graphic of £426 a year, a 17% fall. Whoopee-doo. That's really worth having for anyone. That's a lot of money, 426 quid. Having said that, though, Tom, something that we're not hearing about, and which is why I think the energy regulator is talking about stable prices, i.e. they're not going to go down very much, is because the government ended the subsidy across all our 32 million households of £400 a year to keep energy bills lower, paid in monthly instalments directly to your energy company. That ended in March. So the price cap's coming down on average by 400 quid, but the energy subsidy of 400 quid is disappearing. That means if you actually use more energy than the average household, your bill will go up.
So, potentially, the saving for the average household here isn't £1,000, it's not £400, it's around £26.
That's right. But having said that, there's another proviso here. That is that as energy prices, wholesale energy prices have come down, as the energy price cap has come down, you may now get some of the energy companies, and this is very difficult to know because by law, they don't have to be transparent. I think they should be very transparent about what they're offering across the piece. But some energy companies will now be contacting customers, or they'll be waiting for customers to contact them to start haggling to say, what can you do for me that's below the energy price cap? And the energy companies, if they think wholesale prices will continue to come down, they may take a risk and say, OK, we will offer you cheaper energy below the energy price cap to get you to switch.
Because this is a cap.
That's right.
It's not the level that...
That's right, it's a cap.
So there is still a market beneath that cap.
We may now get some kind of competition coming back into the market. But I surmise it won't be too much. Why do I think that? Because we're starting to see in wholesale markets now, what we call futures markets, a sense that even though wholesale energy prices have come down, they're now below where they were before the war in Ukraine, that they may start to go up again this winter because it could be a colder winter than it was this time last year.
And there's that uncertainty premium, of course, with whatever Mr. Putin decides to do.
All of that geostrategic stuff as well. So, look, the main thing is there's going to be a little reduction in your energy bills, not a huge amount. There may be a bit of more of a reduction this time next year. But on balance, our energy bills, if they come down, to around £2,000 a year on average, that's still double, Tom, what we were paying on average during the 10 years before the war in Ukraine, when energy bills were roughly between £1,000 and £1,200 a year. So we are in a new, higher energy cost world. And that's not only for customers among our 32 million households, it's for most commercial entities too, hospitality, most manufacturing. Only the really energy-intensive companies like steel makers, glass makers and so on get extra subsidies from the government so they can compete internationally. An awful lot of companies will have to struggle on, as will an awful lot of households, with energy bills which remain much, much higher than they were just 2 years ago.
Well, Liam, thank you so much for digging down into the details there and discovering that perhaps it's not actually £400 that the average household will be saving after all, although perhaps the taxpayer will be saving a little bit more. Well, let's move on now, because the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, launched his bid to become the next president of the United States in an online Twitter event with Elon Musk last night. However, because so many tried to tune into it all at once, it caused a series of glitches and technical problems that led to much ridicule from the Trump camp. The former President Donald Trump also accused the candidate of plagiarism with the phrase "Great American Comeback" as it was used in Trump's 2020 State of the Union address. So has the governor of Florida's bid for the presidency already flopped? Or is he a genuine, serious challenge to Donald Trump for that Republican nomination? Well, let's discuss this more with the former Worldview Vice President for Republicans Overseas and political psychologist Jan Halper-Hayes. Jan, thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is an interesting one because for a time it looked in the polls that DeSantis and Trump were neck and neck amongst likely Republican voters. Things have drifted since then.
Well, they've drifted a little bit, but there have been many situations that have contributed to that, Tom. One, in fact, was the indictment against Trump, and people really reacted to that, and that helped. But let's give a perspective on what happened with DeSantis. I don't see it as a super big deal. Other news agencies have reported that it was also DeSantis's phone that had been cutting out back and forth. But if I could provide just a bit more of a historic perspective, because Ron DeSantis is not a mini Trump at all. Ron DeSantis happens to be, his advisor is George Bush's former guru, Karl Rove. So this is more of a battle between the nationalists, the Americans, the great Keep America Great Again, and the globalists. I was involved with Jeb Bush's pre-launch for 6 months. Before you launch, you can collect as much money and you don't have to really declare who gave it to you. For 6 months, he raised $100 million. And then what happened? He launched, and where did he go? The whole media built him up. American politics has to understand that things have changed a great bit. And I think that Ron DeSantis wasn't necessarily sure that he was going to run for president, Tom, but the media, after his success in Florida, just promoted him in this, and then there are obviously a percentage that don't want to see Trump again. So the money started rolling in and people were encouraging him to run. And that's what we're going to see. But we don't know. This is just a minor incident. A minor incident. And I want to make one other comment, if you don't mind. I've noticed on Twitter that some people are accusing Trump of having accused DeSantis of disloyalty. Well, the fact is that if you look at Trump's response when Tim Scott announced his presidential campaign, all Trump had to say was that, so please, I ask the media to give a more balanced perspective to the criticism that comes. He's never criticized Mike Pence, never at all. The only thing he said in his town hall was that Mike Pence listened to his chief of staff and the lawyers and made a decision. So this is something to really look at. And I don't think Trump is in the least bit threatened by DeSantis, and DeSantis will be seen more as a globalist, and he's not. He's going to keep on falling down in the polls, I think, but I think he's got the bad advisors behind him. Sorry.
It's interesting that you make that distinction, because up until perhaps people started to think that he might stand for the role of the Republican nomination, people were saying that this was really the son of Trump, that Ron DeSantis, back when he was in Congress, was a fierce defender of Donald Trump, that in many ways he became Donald Trump's protege and delivered that sort of America First agenda as the governor of Florida, the two-time elected governor of Florida. I wonder, to what extent will that win over potential wavering voters that have registered Republican? The fact that perhaps this is a guy that was so aligned with President Trump, but has also won 2 elections rather than just one.
All right, let's take the one election versus 2 out of the game. The fact is that DeSantis was a very active member with the former Tea Party, the Freedom Caucus. Thank you, the Freedom Caucus. And of course, when he was running for governor both times, he wanted Trump's support, because you do that. You need the endorsement of someone who can pull more voters to you. But what we're going to see unfold is, given the fact that Karl Rove, which means he's got the Bush camp behind him, which means he's got the Cheney camp behind him, we are going to start seeing, when he comes out with his policies, that there's no way similar or being a mini Trump whatsoever. So those are the things that I really want to alert your viewers to watch for, and not just say victory versus non-victory.
Well, Jan Halper-Hayes, it will be a fascinating contest. Really, 2 leading candidates in this pack, in a way that the last Republican primary campaign was so scattered, with many, many dozens of candidates. Jan Halper-Hayes, thank you for joining us here on GB News Live. Well, now let's turn to GB News' own Patrick Christys, who's in Boston for us, and get his reaction to those record migration figures. Patrick, what were your thoughts when you saw these numbers at 9:30 this morning?
Yeah, well, sadly, it's not particularly surprising, is it, Tom? It must be said. But as you can tell, I am in Boston today. Now, this is a fascinating case study, and I'm going to be going live here 3 till 6. And why it's so fascinating is because of this. This was the Brexit-backing capital of Britain, and clearly, a lot of those people voted to take back control of their borders. Now, what this area has seen in the years since Brexit is continued population growth into around the 9–10% mark, rapid demographic change, but also a huge influx of low-skilled foreign economic migrants. And just behind me here, in the shadow of this 14th century Gothic church, is a place that locals call Foreign Island, which is where a lot of people tend to hang around and look for work. And in the time that I've been here, we've seen minibuses coming up, a lot of people getting in, and it would appear that they're going to work in agricultural professions. But over the course of the next 3 hours, Tom, when I come live 3 till 6, I'm going to be talking to business owners, to local politicians, and to demographic experts and economic experts. These are the parts of Britain most affected by rapid, high-rate net migration, and we'll be drilling down into that, Tom.
Well, Patrick, I look forward to it, coming up from 3 to 6, as you say. Well, my name's Tom Harwood, and this is GB News Live. Plenty more to come in the next hour, so please don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. You're with GB News Live. My name's Tom Harwood, and here's what's coming up. A new record that puts the government under pressure. UK net migration reached 606,000 last year, but that's less than was expected. We'll be getting all of the reaction live across the country. And a flowers destroying the planet. Well, we'll speak to Just Stop Oil about why they've targeted the Chelsea Flower Show. And World War II RAF airman Peter Brown was buried today. He was one of the last so-called Pilots of the Caribbean, a group of Afro-Caribbean volunteers who served for the Army, or indeed the Air Force, in World War II. And we'll be over in Northern Ireland for the latest on the King and the Queen's visit. But first, here are your headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon. It's 2:01, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Downing Street has refused calls for Rishi Sunak to apologise despite failing to reduce net migration, which has now risen to record levels. ONS data shows numbers rose to 606,000 last year, even after repeated government pledges to bring overall numbers down. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says the government's trying to tackle the issue.
Well, net migration is far too high. This is placing intolerable pressure on public services, on housing supply, and our ability to integrate people into our country. The Conservative Party has made a promise to reduce net migration, and we're absolutely determined to do that. Well, we've made a very significant intervention this week, which will make a tangible difference, reducing the number of student dependents that come to our universities, because universities should be in the education business, not the immigration business.
But Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock says government policy is to blame for the rise in numbers.
Numbers are too high, they need to come down. The reason they've lost control is because they've failed to do enough to invest in skills and talent and career development here in the UK. So employers are being forced to reach for overseas migrant labour because they don't have the pipeline of people that are ready to come and work and attracted as well to the opportunities that are here in the UK.
Rishi Sunak has welcomed the reduction in the energy price cap, describing it as a major milestone and his goal of halving inflation. Ofgem's announced the typical annual household energy bill will fall to a maximum of £2,074 a year from July. That's a drop of £426. Ofgem says the first price drop in 18 months reflects recent falls in wholesale energy prices. Police Scotland's Chief Constable has described the force as institutionally racist. Sir Ian Livingstone says people from different backgrounds are sometimes not receiving the service they should. He's been speaking at a meeting of the Scottish Police Authority. His comments come just days after the force announced plans to enlist thousands of officers to stamp out so-called canteen culture. Sir Ian's set to retire this summer after 6 years in the job. 3 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at London's Chelsea Flower Show.
Oh, for God's sake!
No! Stop it! Members of the public expressed dismay as the women climbed over a rope and threw orange paint over the RBC Brew and Dolphin Garden. One bystander turned a hose pipe on the protesters before Met Police officers arrived on the scene. Security guards at Heathrow Airport are beginning a 3-day strike over pay on what's expected to be one of the busiest days of the year for air travel. Heathrow says it may take longer than usual to get through security, but claims it has contingency plans in place to minimise disruption. Members of the Unite Union have already held 15 days of industrial action, including over the Easter holidays. Elsewhere, the head of Wagner has announced forces from Russia's mercenary group have started withdrawing from the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. Yevgeny Prigozhin claims he's transferring its positions there to regular Russian troops instead. He announced the capture of the city on May the 20th after the longest and bloodiest battle of the war. Prigozhin says his forces will be ready to return to Bakhmut if the regular army is unable to manage the situation.
We are pulling units out of Bakhmut. It's 5 a.m. on May 25th. Before June 1st, most units will be relocated to the rear camps. We're transferring positions and ammunition to the military, everything, including military rations. But if the military is in a tough situation, of course, we are leaving those who played a crucial part in capturing Bakhmut. The moment when the military are in a tough situation, they will stand up and block the way for the Ukrainian army.
Back here, a funeral has been taking place for one of the last black RAF pilots to have fought in the Second World War. Flight Sergeant Peter Brown died alone last December, aged 96, at his home in West London. The funeral had initially been expected to be a low-key affair after his family couldn't be contacted. But today, hundreds of mourners, including relatives, community groups and celebrities, gathered to celebrate his life. Mr. Brown was born in Jamaica in 1926. He enlisted in the RAF Volunteer Reserve in 1943 and carried out missions as a radio operator and a gunner. And the Princess of Wales is visiting the Foundling Museum in London to meet foster parents and learn about the care system. Kate is a patron of the museum. It tells the history of the Foundling Hospital, which in the mid-18th century began caring for children abandoned by their parents. The Princess is meeting young people who've been in care, as well as caretakers, to discuss the lifelong impact positive, supportive relationships can have on children and young people. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Tom with GB News Live.
Well, let's kick off this hour with the big story of the day, and that is, as expected, net migration has reached record levels. Figures released this morning revealed that 606,000 more people entered the UK than left up to December 2022. This was 164,000 more people than 2021's net migration rise. The Office for National Statistics said that despite the rise, its estimates for long-term migration, its estimates over the long term see a slowing in growth over the most recent quarters. Now, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reacted, saying that migration in the UK is too high, whilst the Labour Party says that the government has no plan and no grip. Well, let's get the angle of this story from across the country now. I'm joined by Mark White in Dover, Darren McCaffrey in Westminster, Anna Riley in Hull and Jack Carson in Solihull. And Mark, let's start with you. Dover is a pertinent place to begin this conversation because for the first year, these net migration figures now include asylum seekers too.
Yes, indeed, and more information about the asylum backlog in terms of applications still waiting to be processed or being processed without an answer. 172,000 asylum claims are now still being processed. That's a 57% rise on the previous year. As, of course, for the small boat crossings, well, it makes up a relatively small proportion of the overall net migration figures. But of course, it's highly visible, it's highly contentious. Again, today we saw 150 people arrive in a number of small boats that were picked up by the Border Force vessels and deposited here this morning. We're also given an interesting breakdown, Tom, of the nationalities that were accounted for last year and in the first 3 months of this year. So last year it was nationals from Afghanistan and also from Albania that were the two countries that were the predominant countries represented on these small boats. Go to the first 3 months of this year and that's changed around to Afghanistan, still the predominant country represented on the small boats, but now in second position is India with some 700 of their nationals who came across between January and March. And then also with regard to the Albanian figure, well, it's just tailed off completely, almost disappeared from what it was last year, now down to just 1% of the total crossing on the boats are Albanians, just 28 people from Albania in the first 3 months of this year.
Mark, that is an extraordinary development because Albania was representing the single largest contingent of small boat arrivals for quite some time. Does this tell us something about the returns agreement that we signed with Albania? Is that potentially a model for getting down these other kinds of migration, of illegal migration, if it seems to have worked so well in regards to Albania?
Yeah, I mean, we're still really in the early days of working through that particular model, but I think the efforts and the messaging that was coming out, both from the UK government, but back in Albania from their own government, really getting that message out that even if you manage successfully to pay the people smugglers to come across the channel, your chances of being accepted for asylum in the UK are virtually zero, and even claiming to be be a victim of modern slavery is unlikely to succeed as the government also, through the changes to the illegal immigration bill, that is also aimed at stamping out abuses of that particular policy as well. So it appears that it has had some kind of, well, a very significant effect, whether it's all down to that or whether it's down to the fact that, of course, so many people, 13,000 Albanians came across in the past year, that actually that might have been the number that were looking to come across from this, remember, very small Western Balkans nation.
Well, Mark, thank you for that. Let's turn now to Darren McCaffrey in Westminster, because the other side of this is, of course, the legal migration, the perfectly legal migration, whereby this government has issued a huge number of visas entirely within their control. This is perhaps an interesting situation, given that consecutive Conservative governments have promised to get the numbers down.
Yeah, it really is, and I mean, musing on your point from the last hour, Tom, where we were talking about controlled migration in relation to Brexit and whether, in fact, actually today should be seen as a bit of a success story for Brexit. And I say that because this is the system that the government, primarily, it must be said, Boris Johnson's government set up post-Brexit. This is what controlling migration looks like, i.e. you've got a lot of students coming in, which the government, frankly, do want to come in. The Education Secretary, world-leading universities contribute over £40 billion a year to the UK exchequer. There is little sign, I think, the government's going to move substantially on that, apart from the already announced clamping down on dependents coming here. Then you've got the generous and kind of warm welcome to refugees that the government continually insists it is part of, whether that's Ukrainians or Hong Kongers or people from Afghanistan. And then you've got the work visa system, which was literally engineered as a way of managing migration post-Brexit, where, again, in certain areas, whether it's the healthcare sector, whether it's the care sector, whether it is in businesses that need them, particularly agriculture, that you attract skilled workers to come and work in those particular fields. Now, is this happening at extraordinary high levels? Undoubtedly is. Is it sustainable? That's a question the government is going to have to face. The bigger question, though, and the bigger problem, I think, for the government is it politically popular? They've designed a system post-Brexit where they do control migration, but are the numbers too high that the public will not buy it? And I think that's going to be the really difficult position for Rishi Sunak, because if he reaches the conclusion that the public will not buy these record numbers, where does he start to shave away at the numbers coming in? Because when I talked about those three areas, actually, in each of those 3 years, it's very difficult to do so. We need workers in places like the healthcare sector. We continue to want to welcome people from war-torn parts of the world, particularly ones that we may well have played a role in. And also, we definitely need students. So none of this is easy, but politically, Labour are trying to make as much capital out of this as they can, and that in itself is quite extraordinary.
It is, indeed, because the Labour Party had traditionally seen this as a bit of an albatross around their neck. The numbers, of course, that so exponentially grew under Tony Blair now, frankly, look fairly tame in comparison to the numbers we're seeing today. I wonder, how is Labour walking this tightrope? Because there are many people in the Labour Party who have championed open borders with the European Union. In fact, Sir Keir Starmer, when he was standing to be leader of the Labour Party, said he wanted to defend free movement, and yet that doesn't appear to be his position today.
Yeah, he's definitely shifted, as many of his critics would say, on this issue as he has done on many. I think Labour are trying to walk a bit of a tightrope here, if you like, between maybe their more traditional supporters who do not like the language and tone, if not the actual policy itself, that comes from the Conservative Party when you talk about migration, whether that be illegal or legal migration. Labour do not want to go down that path because they could well annoy their own supporters, while at the same time want to attract voters who clearly are disappointed where the numbers are when it comes to migration. And that's why they use this argument about the government losing control, if you like, even though they are actually in control of the numbers of migration. And this idea, and I think weirdly, maybe not weirdly, but surprisingly, it's going to be adopted, I think, probably by the governments. That is increasing the thresholds, the income thresholds, when it comes to certain work visas. Labour at the moment argue that in many industries it's too low. It is undermining domestic workers here, if you like, and that you could curb some of the numbers coming into the country if you increased those income tax or thresholds in order to get into those professions. That's where Labour is. It's pretty nuanced. But as I say, politically it's fascinating that they feel confident enough to fight on the battlefield of immigration, given how they've been battered in the past around the free movement of people.
Certainly, perhaps it's more nuanced and more interesting a conversation now, because no politician can simply shut this conversation down by complaining about the European Union. It's now the fault of our own politicians, or indeed the benefit of our own politicians, what they decide to do on this issue. Let's turn to Anna Riley now, who is in Hull, because we were speaking there about international students who obviously pay a lot of money to come into this country, but also make up a huge proportion of these numbers.
Yes, they do, Tom. Looking at figures from the Home Office from March 2022 to March 2023, there was 632,000 international student visas that were granted, including dependents of those students. So when we're talking about dependents, we're talking about the students' family members. And to curb net migration, the government have said that from January next year, international students, unless they're on a PhD course, will not be able to bring their dependents over with them whilst they're studying at universities around the UK. And they've also said they're going to put more measures in place as well to ensure that international students complete their degree courses before they can apply for work visas. And they've also said that they're going to look more into the finances of international students who have dependents here with them to make sure that they can support their families whilst they study. And in addition to this, they also said that they would look into potentially unscrupulous practices of international student agencies in the way that they help students get their visas to study here. But at the same time as doing this, the government do acknowledge the massive benefits that students bring to the economy that come over internationally. They say that they are in support of the international education strategy, and we know from figures that were released by a study from London Economics that in the academic year of 2021 to 2022, here in Yorkshire and the Humber, international students brought £2.9 billion to the economy, and as a whole in the UK they brought £41.9 billion to the economy. And of course it's something that universities around the UK really strive for in getting international students. Here at Hull University behind me, they get around 4,000 international students that they recruit from 70 different countries each year. So what the government seem to be doing here is balancing out the economic benefits that those international students bring, but trying to bring down that net migration by putting an end to most other than PhD students bringing across their dependents from January next year.
Well, Anna, thank you for that. Let's move to Jack Carson in Solihull now, because, Jack, I suppose if international students are one side of the ledger, putting in the billions of pounds to the British economy as they do, the other side of the ledger could be described to be asylum seekers who the British taxpayer spends millions of pounds every day on, many of them being put up in hotels.
Yeah, of course. Behind me is one of those migrant hotels that's here in Solihull, here in the West Midlands. They are being housed, of course, in this temporary accommodation around the country when they enter this, and their claims for asylum are being processed. Of course, we've heard lots of different government plans, lots of different government schemes of what, of course, the more permanent solution might be. Of course, Rwanda being one of the main ones, but we've heard other temporary solutions of ferries, of disused army bases and barracks as well. But been looking at some of also the other refugee figures that have, of course, come out with this data today. 114,000 long-term arrivals, of course, from Ukraine are estimated to have arrived in the UK over the last year. But here in Solihull, of course, with more people, some coming into the West Midlands, coming into the area, people here are a little bit worried about the stress that it is on infrastructure. And I've been getting some reaction today to the net migration figure.
It's frightening.
To think that the taxpayers are paying for all those people to come over, keeping them here and accommodating them. We need something doing drastically.
Yeah, I mean, it is concerning in the sense of the pressures that it puts on all the services in the country. But on the other hand, you realise that there are terrible places in the world that people need to get away from. And so it's always a difficult balance. But I just think we do need to take more care on the people that get here legally and look at ways of how we stop people illegally. But so yeah, I'm kind of open-minded about it, but realising we're a very blessed nation and we can help a lot of people.
I think this country is a beautiful country. I like the people come in, it's no problem, but you need to look after people here first, because here everybody struggle for the payment, for the rent, for the job. Everybody struggle that one, so you need to look at people here first because when people come in. I don't say nobody not coming in. This country is a very beautiful country. Everybody can come in here. Everybody can do what you want to do. It's a free country, so it's happy people coming here, but the government need to look after people here first before you do anything for different people.
They're much too high. Something needs to be done because it's costing us all money. You know, we're having to pay for them. It's all right if they come in and they've got jobs or they qualify for something, but, you know, it's not fair. We've got people in this country who need looking after first.
Yeah, of course, some very kind of not happy people necessarily there with some of the numbers and the level of those numbers, of course, the stress that might cause on things like doctors and other things around here. But of course, we've also had this poll today suggesting that more people trust Labour with their policies on immigration. This Ipsos poll showing that 38% of people trusted Labour to have the right policies on immigration. You compare that to what people thought of the Conservatives, with only 29% saying the same. Of course, in Prime Minister's questions yesterday, we did get a bit of a hint on some immigration policy from the opposition benches when Keir Starmer told MPs to fix the apprenticeships levy, fill that skills gap and stop businesses from recruiting from abroad if they don't pay properly. And of course, here with that, on that point, there is a certain feeling of disenfranchisement with the Conservatives and from what is here traditionally a strong Conservative area. Of course, we know Rishi Sunak's policy is quite clear on here. One of his top 5 priorities he keeps going on about, of course, is stopping those boats. But there's a lot of work still for him and his government to do to gain the trust back of people in this strong Conservative area.
Well, Jack, thank you so much for that. And indeed, thank you to Mark, Darren, Anna and Jack for those perspectives around the country of this crucial issue. Well, my name's Tom Harwood and this is GB News Live. After the break, the King and Queen are in Northern Ireland and we'll get the very latest from this royal trip. See you shortly.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're with GB News Live. Now, it's the final day of the King and Queen's 2-day visit to Northern Ireland, with a visit to Armagh Market and Enniskillen. Yesterday, they visited Hazelbank Park in Newtonabbey, County Antrim, where they officially opened the new Coronation Garden. Well, Doogie Beattie, our Northern Ireland reporter, is joining us to tell us more about that visit. And Doogie, what's the mood there in Armagh?
The mood is very, very high here in Armagh. A lot of crowds came out to see the royal couple as they arrived and as they left, actually. And the big thing here, I suppose, last night was the garden party at Hillsborough Castle. The King had a private meeting with DCI John Caldwell. You'll remember that 3 months ago he was shot in Omagh, and he managed to get his way to that garden party and had a private audience with the King. What was said in that, we will never know, but it was an occasion for him to meet His Majesty at that garden party. That was the news this morning that sort of woke up Northern Ireland, and as the royal couple arrived here in the cathedral city, because Armagh is the home of the Church of Ireland in Ireland and the Catholic Church in Ireland. 2 beautiful cathedrals span the skyline here, and this morning King Charles and the Queen visited the Church of Ireland Cathedral, meeting with religious leaders there and indeed sharing time with school children and community workers in the marketplace behind me here. He is no stranger to Armagh. He was here in 2020 to open the Marketplace Theatre behind us. 2012 again he was alongside myself actually in Armagh Ladies City Prison. They're trying to turn it into a hotel, and they have went on now to further engagements on the west of the province. But I caught up with the Mayor of Banbridge and Armagh, and this is what he had to say.
It was an absolute privilege this morning to meet King Charles and Queen Camilla here in Armagh. We took them around. They met quite a few of our different local groups, the schools, and some of our food heartland producers. And they were very, very relaxed and just seemed to really enjoying the atmosphere here in Armagh. It's absolutely fantastic. When you think that the King has been here before, he opened this building behind me back in 2000, and for him to come back again today and just to forge those links, and he's told us from the stage today that he hopes to get back in the near future. So a lot of organisation goes in, a lot of us are kept in secret for most of what happens until we get here. Briefings were just taking place really last night, but a lot of people working behind the scenes to make it all happen. A lot of people weren't meant to know who was coming, and I think it was the worst kept secret for everyone seemed to know, but it was a really, really enjoyable day.
Tom, you can actually see from that. Well, Tom, there you are. You can see from that the Mayor was extremely pleased, and the people here, it must be said, will give a most warm welcome to the couple. There was handshakes going on down the mall, and quite a crowd had gathered, Union Jacks waving and flowers being given out. All in all, this was an exercise of the King, the first King, British King since the 1940s to visit Northern Ireland, and as a PR exercise, it has been cross-community, and it has went down very, very well.
That's very interesting, the cross-community element of this trip, of course, because it's hard to think about the King in the context of Northern Ireland without thinking about his mentor in life, Lord Mountbatten, who, of course, was murdered by the IRA, a formative experience, no doubt, in the early life of King Charles. That seems to be now in the past. There was a spirit of unity on this visit.
Well, there very much was that spirit of unity, and of course you have touched on exactly that raw nerve of Lord Louis Mountbatten. He was blown up just one day before paratroopers were faced an IRA bomb attack on the Narrow Water attack in Warren Point. I actually remember that as a child back in the 70s, and those were vicious times in Northern Ireland's history. And in fact, for the King to be talking and shaking hands and inviting Sinn Féin, which is the political wing of the IRA, to not only the Queen's funeral but also his coronation, you would never have believed back in the 70s and 80s that would ever have happened. In fact, you would never have believed that there was such light touch security here in Armagh, because this is a border town. You would have never believed that back 20, 30 years ago, and it shows you how far Northern Ireland, both north and south, have come on.
Well, that's a positive news story for us today. Dougie Beattie, thank you so much for bringing us that live from Armagh. Now, the energy price cap comes down, but will you be paying any less? Our very own Liam Halligan will be here to explain why perhaps there's not as much cause to celebrate as you might think. But first, here's your news update with Rhiannon.
Tom, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2:32, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Downing Street has refused calls for Rishi Sunak to apologise despite failing to reduce net migration, which has now risen to record levels. ONS data shows numbers rose to 606,000 last year, even after repeated government pledges to bring overall numbers down. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says the government is trying to tackle the issue.
Well, net migration is far too high. This is placing intolerable pressure on public services, on housing supply, and our ability to integrate people into our country. The Conservative Party has made a promise to reduce net migration, and we're absolutely determined to do that. Well, we've made a very significant intervention this week, which will make a tangible difference, reducing the number of student dependents that come to our universities, because universities should be in the education business, not the immigration business.
Rishi Sunak welcomes the reduction in the energy price cap, saying it's a major milestone in his goal of halving inflation. Ofgem's announced the typical annual household energy bill will fall to £2,074 a year from July. That's a drop of £426. Ofgem says the reduction reflects recent falls in wholesale energy prices.
Oh, for God's sake!
No! Stop it! 3 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at London's Chelsea Flower Show. The women climbed over a rope and threw orange paint over the RBC Brew and Dolphin Garden. One bystander turned a hose pipe on the protesters before Met police officers arrived at the scene. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. And don't go anywhere. Tom will be back with GB News Live in just a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Now, 3 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at London's Chelsea Flower Show. Let's take a watch.
Oh, for God's sake!
No! Stop it!
The woman climbed over a rope and threw orange paint over the display. One bystander turned a hose pipe on the protesters before the Met Police arrived on the scene and arrested the protesters. Well, with me now is Kush Naker, a Just Stop Oil supporter. And Kush, thank you for joining us today. I suppose many people will be a little bit confused at why there was such a vicious attack on plants this afternoon.
Sure. So, first of all, let me say that the action that took place today at the Royal Flower Show was not a vicious attack on plants. They threw around some children's paint powder, which is completely non-toxic and can be washed away without causing any harm. But what is a vicious attack on plants is the climate crisis, because we know that our dependence on fossil fuels is driving us towards climate collapse. And we know that actually our food security is at a threat as a result of it. If you just look at the growing seasons of maize, corn, one of the world's staple crops, it's now 9 days shorter than it used to be because of the climate crisis. You look at wheat, it's 6 days shorter. If you look at rice, it's 2 days shorter. So we have got crop failures happening across the world and people being pushed into extreme hunger. Right now, in Somalia, there is unprecedented famine that is taking place, and there is a child being admitted to hospital every single minute with malnutrition. I work as a doctor in the NHS, and I have committed my life towards trying to protect people's health. And so I think that the action that was taken today by supporters of Just Stop Oil is absolutely necessary. You may say, well, why on earth did they go to the Chelsea Flower Show? And I say, well, because actions like that are impactful. It's what's got me talking to you today about the famines that are happening in Somalia, because otherwise I don't think that we would be talking about that. And you might say, well, what do you want the people at the Chelsea Flower Show to do about it? And I'd say, well, we want them to join us in civil resistance against the government. Because it is our government, along with governments around the world, who are continuing to license new fossil fuels, even though we know that that is causing a climate breakdown.
Kush, the government agrees with you. The government has committed the country to net zero by 2050. We're seeing the most extraordinary amount of decarbonisation. We've halved our emissions since 1990. We're seeing the internal combustion engine being banned in this country. It's extraordinary. The government's on your side here. Who are you arguing with?
Well, unfortunately, the government's plans are too little too late. They are saying that they want to get net zero by 2050, and yet they are still licensing over 100 new oil and gas fields. That is not compatible with us meeting our Paris Climate Agreement. The International Energy Agency, the IPCC, all of the world's leading scientists say that new oil and gas needs to have stopped already, and yet we are still allowing new oil and gas to be extracted from the North Sea. That is who we are against. We are against the government. We are against the government.
The agreements that were reached at COP26 in Glasgow, where I reported for 2 weeks, very much kept warming to 1.5 degrees alive as a goal. It's quite possible to have some oil extraction, but also do lots of other things, as 90% of the global economy has now committed to do. I find it very strange that you seem to be living in this parallel universe where somehow you're having debates that seem to be had in the 1990s, rather than living in the reality today where 90% of the global economy agrees with you.
I'm not sure that you quite fully understand the scale of damage that new oil and gas is continuing to do. So at the moment, we are approaching what are called tipping points. So all good and well that we'll be net zero by 2050, but the problem is what happens between now and 2050 will actually guide the future of humanity for millennia to come. And that is what happens in terms of tipping points in the Arctic Circle. So once we end up losing parts of Arctic ice sheets, those will become irrecoverable. Once we deforest the Amazon rainforest to a certain degree, then it just becomes impossible to recover from that.
Which seems extraordinary then, why there are environmental protesters who are opposing carbon capture and storage. There are environmental protesters who are campaigning against wind farms and the infrastructure needed to support them. There are Green Party councillors across this country who are opposing solar farms. Why are you siding with these people if you're so concerned about the environment?
I'm not siding with anyone who's against solar farms or wind farms. I would love to see carbon capture and storage, but I think we need to realise that carbon capture and storage is not something that is a realistic prospect to tackle the climate crisis. It, at the moment, is being used as a delaying tactic by the oil and gas industry to justify them continuing to rely on oil and gas.
Oh, come on, you're now arguing against it. You're using talking points against carbon capture and storage. That's entirely contradictory
to something that could work on the scale that it needs to actually get us to net zero, then great. But actually, what is carbon capture and storage doing at the moment in terms of the scale of it? It's hardly flickering any impact on the amount of CO2 that's being released. And the energy that is generated from carbon capture and storage is actually then being used to extract more fossil fuels. So I'm saying, let's be real about what carbon capture and storage is and what its prospects are.
I noticed you talked about crop failure a little bit earlier. I wonder, as someone with a medical background, what's your view of the campaigning work that Greenpeace has done against golden rice, the GM crops that have allowed people to get the nutrients they need in the developing world? Greenpeace, for 30 years, campaigned against this life-saving development in crop technology. Are you siding with them too?
I'm here speaking on behalf of Just Stop Oil, and our campaign is very clear. Our campaign is targeted at the government, asking them to stop new oil and gas. I don't know the details of all of Greenpeace's actions. On the whole, Greenpeace are calling for the similar sort of thing, which is no new oil and gas, and I can support that. I don't know every single campaign that every other environmental movement has done, and I can't speak on behalf of them.
Well, Kirsch, thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon. I really do hope that your sort of environmentalism spreads further amongst particularly the Green councillors and indeed Greenpeace and other green groups that seem to be relatively contradictory in some of their aims. But talking about green issues, perhaps talking about green taxes that make our energy bills more expensive. Jeremy Hunt says that the government is doing what it takes to increase energy bill support further if bills rise again this autumn. Now, this comes as the energy regulator Ofgem announces a slash in the energy price cap, reducing those bills from July by nearly £430 on average per year for the average household, compared to what they otherwise would be. But how does that compare to what bills are today? Joining me is our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Now, Liam, I think there's something within these numbers that perhaps is a little bit confusing. There are different price caps, but also the difference between what we pay today and what we might have paid in some hypothetical future.
And there are price caps and there are price guarantees, and they're all average numbers. So if you use more energy, you pay more. If you use less energy, you pay less. It is very, very confusing. So let's just walk through the numbers. Tom, strap yourselves in. I've got a graphic here. The energy price cap has been cut by Ofcom today from £3,280 to £2,074, implemented from July the 1st. Now, that means that the average household will pay £2,074 from July the 1st. They stipulate a unit cost, and if your average use among our 32 million households, that's the price you pay. So, of course, if you use more energy, you pay more. Average bills, though, won't come down from £3,280 to £2,074. They'll come down from £2,500 to £2,074. Why? Because the energy price guarantee has been £2,500, because the government's been paying the difference between that guarantee and the cap because of high energy prices in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine. So what does all that mean? That means for the average household, there'll be a reduction from July the 1st to £426 per year, a 17% reduction, which is pretty sizable. That's worth having. £426 broken down into monthly savings, you know, is useful for any household. Having said that, Tom, that reduction is offset by the fact that from March, the government has ended the subsidies across all our households, giving us 400 quid to help with our energy bills, regardless of whether we're rich or poor, regardless of the size of the households, because energy prices have been so high on wholesale markets. So while the price cap is coming down by 400 quid, the help the government is giving us is going down by 400 quid as well. So what we actually pay will stay roughly the same. And that's why even the energy regulator, the guy who runs Ofgem, is now talking about stability of prices rather than cuts.
So a net saving for the average household of £26 a year.
It's around a drink.
Just over £2 a month. But I suppose there is a crucial point here, though, which is the energy price guarantee, and indeed that £400 that was sent by the government to every household. That wasn't free. That was paid for by the taxpayer. So there is a saving here for the taxpayer.
There is a saving here for a taxpayer, and just, I don't want to spread any alarm here, the £400 flat payment to all households has gone, but there are still, you know, pretty comprehensive payments to vulnerable households, people with disabilities. A lot of people with disabilities use special equipment that uses a lot of electricity. The government's been very careful to keep those in place.
So the ending of the subsidy is just for those on middle and high incomes?
Well, it was an across-the-board subsidy. Yeah. That has gone, that flat-rate subsidy. But nothing that Ofgem has said today removes the special payments for vulnerable and other low-income households, a lot of households on universal credit and so on. So let's not spread alarm. I think the broader point to say, Tom, is that, yes, wholesale energy prices have come down on West European markets. Gas is used to generate electricity. And even if you generate electricity using renewables, the price of that electricity is still linked to gas for complicated reasons, which we can talk about another time. But trust me on that. But the issue now is what will happen this winter, because last winter was a lot warmer than a lot of people expected. We didn't use as much gas as we expected, as we were weaning ourselves off Russian gas. Russian gas has typically provided 40% of gas to Western Europe. The question now is this coming winter, I know it's barely midsummer, but is this coming winter going to be colder? And are there going to be more geopolitical squalls, a flare-up in the war in Ukraine, which makes the West take even tougher action against exports of Russian energy, etc., etc.? So Energy prices are coming off a bit. They're likely to come off a bit more this autumn. But when it comes to winter and early next spring, we really don't know. And that will drive the whole inflation picture, not just for households, but for firms too, because firms use lots of energy, you know, restaurants, hotels, but also factories, and that feeds into inflation. And that's why I've been saying since these big inflation numbers came out yesterday, yes, inflation has fallen, but it's a battle that's not yet won.
Well, Liam, we know that you'll be keeping your ear to the ground on this issue as these crucial months develop. Liam Halligan there, our economics and business editor. Well, finally today, the legendary rock and roll icon Tina Turner has died peacefully at the age of 83. This is following a long illness. Touching tributes have been pouring in from the likes of Mick Jagger and Mariah Carey, with Elton John describing her as untouchable and a total legend on record and on stage. Well, I'm joined now by the chief albums critic at The Independent, Helen Brown. And Helen, I suppose it's hard to overstate just how influential Tina Turner was on the entire music scene. Just how much did she trailblaze? How much did she change things?
Oh, she changed so many things. I mean, she's the first black artist ever to appear on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. She's the first woman over 40 to score a #1 hit in the States. She's the woman who taught Mick Jagger to dance. She changed the game for so many artists who followed her. She allowed us to cross genres, cross races, cross styles. A spectacular firecracker spirit of a performer.
And it is remarkable how her fame reached its zenith perhaps later in her life. When we look at the charts today, we see so many people who in their early 20s who are achieving chart-topping success. This sort of comeback story of Tina Turner is so inspiring for so many people.
It's a survivor's story, isn't it? Here's the story of a woman, Ike Turner, her first husband, pretended for a long time he'd discovered her singing in a club. Actually, what was happening was that he passed the mic around to women he found attractive every night while performing. It was young Annie Mae Bullock who actually seized the microphone from him, showed off her voice. It took another record producer to tell Ike Turner, you need that woman at the front of your band. But when she was doing what he said, they didn't get the hits. It was only after she struck out on her own that she became the multi-million-dollar Grammy-winning superstar.
And it is so interesting to see how open she was about the harder times in her life, not just coming from nothing growing up, but also the abusive relationship that she suffered. How important is that story to have sort of made its way into the public imagination?
It's hugely important. Hers is a survivor story. She was blazing the Me Too trail 30 years before the rest of the world caught on. It was 1976. 1976 was the last time that Ike Turner battered his wife. And this was a guitarist who would regularly, he punctured a lung, bronchitis. She said she didn't know what it was like to live without a black eye. So he was beating her every day for 18 years. She finally fled from him the day before Independence Day in July 1976. She had 36 cents in her purse. She had a black eye, a bloody face. She ran across an interstate highway to restart her life. And often today we tell that story as an instant turnaround. It wasn't. It took that woman 8 years to rebuild her career, to put herself back together. She had to come to England. She had to leave the US, come to England. Yes. She put herself in the hands of an Australian producer. She took complete control. She recreated her image. She wore those leather miniskirts because she wanted freedom. She wanted her legs to be free. She said she felt like a princess trapped in the clothes. It is
an inspiring story. And Helen Brown, thank you so much for talking through it with us. I'm sorry we don't have more time to explore it there. But just finally today, our main story, the release of those net migration figures. GB News' very own Patrick Christys is in Boston for us and indeed will be with us next. Patrick, what is coming up?
Yes, exactly. Well, it is 3 hours of this dissection of a massive record day for Britain. And I am in Boston, which is the Brexit-backing capital of Britain. It's also the area, apparently, with the least amount of integration, a population growth of around 10% in the last 10 years. In many ways, a microcosm, Tom, of mass migration into Britain. I'm going to be starting the show at this cafe here with the former mayor of Boston. We're going to be making our way down through the centre towards this town square here. I'll be speaking to a whole host of politicians, local business owners, crucially as well, members of the public, as we lead up to a place that locals call Foreign Square. This area has seen massive demographic change, and it's going to be reacting to those record migration numbers for the next 3 hours on our migration special.
Well, Patrick, it sounds like it's going to be a fascinating show, and I look forward to tuning in with you in just the top of the hour. But that's it from us here on GB News Live. Don't go anywhere, of course, because Patrick will be bringing you all the latest stories and indeed moving his traversing show through the centre of Boston, Lincolnshire. So stick around for Patrick Christie's as he brings you his migration special coming up next.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
a record-breaking day. Net migration of 606,000, double what it was pre-Brexit. And today I am in the Brexit-backing capital of Britain, which is Boston in Lincolnshire, in the shadow of a 14th century church, which now overlooks an area known locally as Foreign Island. I'm going to be drilling down into these numbers. Boston is a case study of mass migration, rapid demographic change, a huge influx of cheap foreign labour. I'm going to be talking to top-tier MPs, local politicians, economic experts, demographic experts, as we get to grips with these latest net migration figures for the Net Migration Special on GB News. GB News is the People's Channel, and today's show is all about the people who voted in record numbers to take back control of our borders.